Hello everyone, welcome to our new topic, The Price of Flowers by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyay. An emotionally touching story, The Price of Flowers. The Price of Flowers is an emotionally touching short story written by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyay. He was one of the best short story writers in Bengali literature. His short stories are mainly based on real life situations, and his characters belong to the middle class families. The story Price of Flowers was written in Bengali and it was translated into English by Leela Ray. The story was set up in London during the pre independence period. In the story, Mukhopadhyay depicted the life of a poor English family. Mr. Gupta is the narrator of the short story. The story is about a young, poor British teenage girl, Maggie, who sacrifices her hard earned shilling for offering a floral tribute to her dead brother, Frank. Her sacrifice and the contentment derived out of it are invaluable and priceless. Now, let's go to the summary of the story, The Price of Flowers. Welcome, all of you. Welcome to the emotionally touching short story, The Price of Flowers. The narrator, Mr. Gupta, was in London for civil service training. It was 1 o'clock on Saturday. Gupta walked to a restaurant in St. Martin's Lane. He entered a vegetarian restaurant. The waitress came and Gupta ordered his lunch. At that time, Gupta saw an English girl, 13 or 14 years old, with long hair and large eyes. Her clothes were cheap. Her hair hung in heavy stream down her back. Her eyes were large, but they had a sad expression. She was watching Gupta with interest and surprise. She was having her lunch at another table. Gupta noticed it that she was watching Gupta with interest and surprise. He looked at her. While he looked at her, she immediately turned her eyes away. The girl finished her lunch and she got up. She went to the cashier and paid her bill. She asked the cashier about Gupta whether he was an Indian. Then, once more she looked at Gupta and she went out. Gupta was surprised. He asked the waitress about the girl. The waitress replied that she has lunch here on Saturdays. The girl was working in a nearby shop, and Saturday was the pay day, so she went to the restaurant for having a lunch on Saturdays only. She received only a low salary. Gupta wanted to know more about this girl. On next Saturday, he went to the restaurant and met her. He talked to her. She was Alice Margaret Clifford, also called Maggie. She lived in Lambeth with her old mother, Mrs. Clifford. Mrs. Clifford is a widow. The girl had an elder brother, Francis, also called as Frank, her only guardian. He was in Punjab, India, as a soldier. They had no news of Frank for a long time. So they were very much worried about Frank. Maggie's mother wanted to meet an Indian to ask about India. Maggie made the request to Gupta to visit her home and to meet her mother. Gupta agreed. He felt a lot of sympathy for Maggie and her mother. Gupta went with Maggie to see her mother. Maggie worked as a typist, but she did not like the work. She wanted to use her brain and she liked the work of a secretary. She was very polite. She cared her mother very much. Gupta understood that she was a very loving sister. Her mother made cakes and sold them on Saturday evenings. The girl and her mother had many false beliefs about India and Indians. They believed that most Indians were vegetarians and India is full of tigers, fevers, and snakes. And there were yogis in India. They did not eat meat and they had occult powers. Occult powers means supernatural powers. Indians were able to predict the future. These all are the beliefs about Indians. Gupta met Mrs. Clifford in the kitchen. She asked Gupta about India and Punjab. India is a beautiful country and Punjab is a fine place. Gupta said. Mrs. Clifford was glad to hear it. Gupta went upstairs. It was a poor house. The furniture of the house was very cheap and the carpet was torn in some places. But everything in the house was very clean. There was a glass bookcase and a violin. Maggie had learned some music by herself and she was very hard-working girl. After tea, Maggie showed Gupta a ring. A yogi gave it to Frank. It was a magic ring. And they believed that this magic ring has some occult powers. And Gupta was an Indian and he will be able to see these occult powers while he is looking at the ring. And he might be able to know about Frank by looking into the ring. Maggie and her mother believed so. Gupta knew that superstitions were not confined in India only, but in London too, the superstitions prevails. While he looked at the ring, he understood that it was a brass ring with an ordinary glass piece in it. Gupta could not see anything in the ring. Maggie and her mother were disappointed. Gupta changed the subject and he asked Maggie to play the violin and she did it. Gupta praised her Lord. And the home visit touched Gupta very deeply. 3 months passed. Gupta visited Maggie and her mother several times. He took Maggie to the zoo. Later, on inquiry, Gupta knew that Frank was fighting on the border in India. And Mrs. Clifford was very much worried when she heard of it. One day, Gupta received a postcard from Maggie. Maggie's mother was seriously ill. Maggie was not able to go to work and she wanted to see Gupta. Gupta went to Lambeth to meet Maggie and her mother. When he reached there, Mrs. Clifford was asleep. Maggie said her mother was wanted to see Gupta. Mrs. Clifford was very much worried about her son. She wanted to know what happened to her son. Mr. Gupta was an Indian and a Hindu, and he would be able to look into the ring and see something about Frank. Mrs. Clifford believed that while Gupta looked into the ring and he will able to see Frank. Maggie was weeping. Now she had a request to Gupta. It was to look into the ring and tell her mother that Frank was alive. Mrs. Clifford was seriously ill. It was because of a worry about her son. Gupta's words would save her. Maggie believed so. Gupta agreed and he did so. Mrs. Clifford became happy and she recovered from her illness. The time for Gupta's return to India came. He wrote a letter to Maggie saying them goodbye. He did not want to meet Mrs. Clifford. He was ashamed. He told her that Frank was alive. It was a lie. Frank had died in the war. It was almost morning of his last day in London. Maggie came to see him. She gave him a shilling. It was to buy flowers for her brother's grave in the Punjab. Her eyes were filled with tears. Gupta first thought of returning the shilling. She had earned it so much, work hard. On second thought, he accepted it, and it was Maggie's love and sacrifice for her brother. Frank's grave was in Ryjaaa at Fort Monroe. When he accepted the money offered by Maggie, she was very much happy. And Gupta wiped her tears, one or two from her eyes, and he went upstairs to pack his bags. Here ends our story, The Price of Flowers. Please, dears, please don't forget to subscribe my channel. Please subscribe and share my videos to your friends too. Thank you. Thanks for watching.